Have you ever been made to question your own worth in a place where you should feel safe? Imagine walking through the bustling gates of a major airport, first-class ticket in hand, only to have someone look at you as if you don't belong. That was Elijah Carter's world for a tense, unforgettable few minutes. A decorated CEO, a man of accomplishments, reduced to proving he had a right to exist in a seat he had purchased. What would you do if every eye around you silently judged you? If an authority figure challenged your integrity without cause, and the choice before you was to either react in anger or remain calm against injustice, could you hold your dignity while the world seemed to turn against you? And what would it take for someone to finally step in and set things right? As you watch this story unfold, imagine yourself in Elijah's shoes, the weight of scrutiny, the temptation to lash out, the courage it takes to stand firm. Each decision he made sent ripples far beyond the gate, changing not just his flight, but an entire airline's culture. Join us in this journey of tension, courage, and unexpected vindication. Witness what happens when integrity meets accountability, and consider how far would you go to protect your dignity. If this story resonates, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the full journey of Elijah Carter and the unforgettable events that change the skies forever. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of a quiet Chicago townhouse, painting soft golden streaks across the hardwood floor. Elijah Carter sat at his kitchen counter, stirring a cup of black coffee that had already gone lukewarm. His 10-year-old daughter, Ava, sat across from him, her legs swinging under the chair, humming the theme from a cartoon she loved. "Dad," she said between bites of toast, "will you be back before my art show?" He smiled. "You know I wouldn't miss it for the world. I'll be back Friday night. You just make sure your paintbrush behaves this time." Ava giggled. No promises. Their laughter filled the kitchen, a sound that had come to define Elijah's mornings more than the smell of coffee or the headlines on his tablet. For all the boardrooms and conference stages that had become part of his life, these moments were the ones that kept him grounded. On the counter lay his travel bag, neat and compact, next to a sleek laptop and a dark blue passport embossed with gold letters. The ticket on his phone read Skylink Airways 611 Chicago to San Francisco, first class, seat 2A. He didn't fly first class to show status. He did it for the quiet. For a man who spent most of his life negotiating deals and designing technology meant to make life fairer. Silence was luxury. Before heading out, Elijah tied his tie a subtle navy pattern Ava had picked out for him. She liked to call it his lucky tie. He looked at his reflection. A tall black man in his early 40s, neatly shaved, with a calm confidence that came not from privilege but from persistence. He had built Novosphere Tech from a rented basement into a billion-dollar enterprise. Its mission, using ethical artificial intelligence to make human systems less biased, more humane. Irony had a sense of humor, he thought. "All right, superstar," he said to Ava, kneeling to her height. "You'll be good for Grandma." "Okay, I always am." He hugged her tightly, breathing in the faint scent of the coconut shampoo she loved. For a moment, the world outside felt distant. No deadlines, no flights, no cameras waiting for his keynote address. Just father and daughter, safe inside a small bubble of ordinary happiness. As he walked toward the door, Ava called out, "Dad, don't forget smile when you talk about fairness. People listen better when you smile." He turned, grinned, and saluted her. Copy that. Captain Carter. The Uber ride to O'Hare took about 40 minutes. Elijah watched the skyline retreat in the rearview mirror, Chicago's towers glowing like a city made of glass and ambition. The driver, a chatty older man named Miguel, recognized him from a tech podcast. "You're that guy, right? The one talking about making AI less, racist?" Elijah laughed softly. "That's one way to put it. Good stuff, man," Miguel said. "We need more folks like you doing that. I drive all kinds of people every day. You'd be surprised what comes out of some mouths." Elijah nodded, gaze drifting to the highway. "Not really," he murmured. He had learned long ago that progress didn't come easy. Every boardroom he entered, every interview he gave, he could feel the invisible weight of being both the first and the only. Still, he carried it with grace. His father, a former mechanic who worked double shifts to pay for Elijah's first computer, had taught him one rule: never let anger do the talking. Let excellence do it instead. That lesson had built his company, and in a few hours, it would be tested more brutally than ever before. O'Hare International was a world unto itself. Screens flickered with departure times, suitcases rolled like a steady drumbeat, and the smell of roasted coffee mingled with jet fuel. Elijah moved through it with the practiced rhythm of a frequent traveler. His shoes clicked softly on the tile, his ID already in hand. At security. The TSA agent greeted him politely. He smiled back. A good sign, he thought. Maybe today would be smooth. He texted his assistant, boarding in an hour. "See you at the summit." Then another message to his mother landed at the airport. "Tell Ava I love her." A few minutes later, he stood at the Skylink Premier Lounge entrance. The hostess checked his name, smiled warmly. "Welcome back, Mr. Carter. Your flight's on time. Gate C-18. He thanked her and entered. Inside, soft jazz played over muted conversation. He poured himself sparkling water, glanced at the news Skylink CEO Robert Hayes to attend West Coast Leadership Forum. Interesting coincidence, he thought. Elijah always used travel time to reflect. As he sipped his drink, his mind drifted not to his keynote slides, but to a memory. He was 21, freshly graduated, rushing through an airport in Atlanta. Security had pulled him aside, insisted his ticket couldn't be real. "You people don't usually fly business," the officer had said. It wasn't the words that stung most, it was the laughter of those waiting behind him. He had vowed then that if he ever built something powerful, it would be used to make systems smarter than their biases, to teach machines the fairness that humans so often forgot. He checked his watch. 9:35 a.m., boarding soon. When Elijah arrived at Gate C-18, the scene was its usual chaos. Families juggling luggage, business travelers glued to their phones, flight attendants moving with rehearsed smiles. The big monitor flashed Flight 611 to San Francisco, boarding Group 1 at 9:50 a.m. He glanced down at his phone, double-checking the digital ticket glowing on the screen. Group 1, first class, seat 2A, everything in order. He took a deep breath, letting the hum of the terminal wash over him, the rolling carts, distant announcements, snippets of laughter. To him, airports had always felt like mirrors of humanity, beautiful, messy, unpredictable, and yet, beneath that calm rhythm, he could sense something else, that faint, familiar tension in the air, the kind you feel before a storm you can't yet see. Still, he smiled to himself, slid his phone back into his pocket, and thought, maybe today's just another flight. It wasn't, because standing at the gate podium, scanning the crowd with sharp blue eyes and a thin, impatient smile, was a woman named Linda Hawthorne, and she had already decided who belonged in that line and who didn't. The storm had found him. The hum of O'Hare International Airport was like a living creature, thousands of footsteps weaving together in a rhythm of impatience and purpose. The overhead speakers called out destinations in steady succession. Dallas, Seattle, Miami. A woman's voice, bright but detached, announced flight changes that sent waves of movement across the terminal. To most people, it was chaos. To Elijah Carter, it was music. He had always seen airports as symphonies organized noise, moments of harmony stitched between long waits and endless lines, the shuffle of sneakers, the click of heels, the low hum of conversations layered with the scent of coffee and jet fuel. He liked it that way. It reminded him that the world still moved, still breathed, despite everything. He checked his watch, boarding in 15 minutes. The soft jazz from the lounge still lingered in his ears as he made his way toward Gate C-18. He walked slowly, the way people do when they have nowhere urgent to be, even though he always did. Near the gate, a man in a gray hoodie argued with a vending machine. A child chased a balloon across the aisle. Two women, both flight attendants, laughed about something on one of their phones. For a moment, it was just another airport morning. Elijah sat down a few rows from the gate podium, opened his tablet, and pulled up his keynote slides for the upcoming tech summit in San Francisco. The title glowed softly on the screen, Human Fairness in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. He stared at it for a while, not reading, just watching the words. Fairness. It was such a simple term, yet it always felt heavy. The kind of word everyone supported until it asked something of them. He thought of his father again, of grease-stained hands, long nights fixing engines for people who barely said thank you. Son, his father used to say. Some folks look at you and see a problem before they see a person. You can't control that, but you can control how you answer them. That memory settled on him like a quiet prayer. A faint voice snapped him out of thought. "Excuse me, are you using this seat?" Elijah looked up. A young woman in her early 20s stood beside him, holding a camera with a microphone attached. Her smile was nervous but genuine. "No, go ahead," he said, moving his bag. She sat down and introduced herself. "I'm Maya, journalism student. I'm flying to the same conference. I saw your name on the speakers list. I'm kind of a fan, actually." Elijah chuckled. "A fan of fairness talks. That's a new one." "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "Of your story. You built Novosphere from nothing. I read about your mentorship program for kids in South Side. My little brother signed up last year." That drew a genuine smile from him. "Then, I guess we're both heading west for good reasons." Maya fiddled with her camera strap. "Do you ever get tired of being the example? The one people point to when they say things are getting better?" Elijah thought for a moment before answering. "Every day. But then I remember, if I'm not visible, someone else might not get the chance to be." She nodded, clearly moved by his calm tone. They chatted a bit longer about San Francisco, about the future of tech until the boarding announcement interrupted. Skylink Airways Flight 611 to San Francisco will begin pre-boarding for our first-class passengers. Elijah stood, adjusting the strap of his carry-on. Maya waved her camera. "Maybe I'll get to interview you after your speech." "Maybe," he said with a wink. "Just make sure you catch the truth, not the soundbite." As he approached the gate podium, he could already feel the temperature of the air change not literally, but in atmosphere. The woman behind the counter stood stiff, her blonde hair tied so tight it seemed to pull her expression upward into permanent disapproval. The name tag read Linda Hawthorne. She looked up briefly, her eyes scanning Elijah the way security scanners look for metal precise, impersonal, but searching for trouble. "First class only," she said automatically, as if reading a script she'd said 1,000 times. He stopped, polite smile intact. "That's me." She frowned, not at the words but at the certainty behind them. "May I see your boarding pass?" Elijah handed her his phone. She didn't scan it, just looked, then looked at him, then looked again at the phone. "This doesn't seem right," she murmured. "You must be mistaken." "No mistake," Elijah replied, tone calm, measured, seat 2A. Her lips tightened. "Do you have ID?" He showed his driver's license, his passport. She glanced, nodded curtly, still not moving the scanner toward the phone. Behind him, people began forming a line. A few shifted impatiently. Elijah could feel eyes on him, some curious, some sympathetic, some indifferent. He stayed still. Years of boardroom battles had taught him one thing: silence can be louder than anger. "Sir," Linda said finally, lowering her voice, "I just need to verify. We've had issues with fake tickets recently." "I understand," Elijah said evenly, "then scan it." She hesitated, the scanner poised inches above the screen. Her jaw clenched. Instead of scanning, she looked over his shoulder and called out, "Tom, can I get a supervisor over here?" A tall man with tired eyes. Tom Riley walked over, confusion already on his face. "What's up?" Linda leaned toward him, speaking just loud enough for Elijah to hear. "This gentleman claims first class, but the ticket looks off." Tom frowned, took the phone, glanced at it, then at Elijah. His hesitation was worse than accusation. It was cowardice dressed as procedure. Elijah exhaled slowly. He could feel his heartbeat rising, but his voice remained soft. "You could just scan it. It'll take 2 seconds." Linda crossed her arms. "We'll handle this, sir. Please step aside." That word, sir, cut like sarcasm. The same word used to keep people in their place. Behind them. The line shifted. Maya, standing a few feet away, started recording. Her instincts told her something wasn't right. Elijah felt the weight of every eye again. He thought of Ava, her smile that morning, her art show, her advice to smile when you talk about fairness. He tried to smile. It trembled. Tom finally spoke, half-hearted. "Linda, maybe just scan it so we can move on." But Linda didn't move. "I know what I'm doing. Security's been clear these systems can be tricked. We can't just let anyone board first class. Anyone." That word lingered in the air, heavy as smoke. Elijah caught it. Everyone did. The space between his calm and her suspicion grew colder by the second. Anyone, he repeated softly. She didn't answer. The gate speaker announced again, final call for first-class passengers, Flight 611 to San Francisco. Linda's hand hovered over the scanner but didn't press. Instead, she turned to Tom. "Let's confirm with the manifest. He can wait." Elijah's jaw tightened, though his face stayed composed. "I've already waited long enough." He extended his hand calmly. "Scan it, or tell me, clearly, why you won't." Linda's gaze flickered. "Don't raise your voice." "Sir." "I'm not," Elijah replied quietly, "but you're raising walls that shouldn't exist." Her cheeks flushed. "You're being difficult." Maya's camera caught it all, the tension, the power shift, the silent restraint of a man who refused to lose his dignity, even when it was being chipped away. People behind him began whispering. A man muttered, "Just scan it. Lady." Another woman shook her head. Linda's patience snapped. "Sir, please step aside before I call airport security." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Elijah didn't move. He didn't yell. He didn't plead. He simply looked her in the eye and said, "Do what you need to do, but truth doesn't need permission to be seen." Tom swallowed hard. "Linda, this is getting out of hand." She ignored him. And then, almost as if the universe had chosen that exact second to intervene, the scanner in her hand beeped an accidental press as she shifted her grip. A green light blinked. Boarding pass valid. The noise around them seemed to vanish. For one breathless moment, the entire gate froze. The machine had spoken. Linda's face turned pale. That must be an error. Elijah said nothing. He didn't smirk or gloat. He just held her gaze, steady as stone. Maya's camera kept rolling, and from somewhere in the back of the crowd, a voice, calm, firm, broke through the silence. "Is there a problem here?" Elijah turned slightly. Standing a few feet away, dressed not in a suit but a company polo with the Skylink emblem, was a man he recognized from news articles and industry summits. "Robert Hayes, CEO of Skylink Airways," Linda stammered. "Mr. Hayes, this passenger, his ticket." Robert held up a hand. "I heard enough." He glanced at the scanner, still flashing green, then at Elijah, whose expression was equal parts composed and weary. "I think," Robert said quietly, "we've all seen enough." Elijah didn't know it yet. But this moment, the quiet before the reckoning, was about to change not only his life, but the way an entire company faced its conscience. And somewhere behind them, Maya whispered to her camera, "This is going to matter." For a moment, no one at Gate C18 moved. The crowd's whispers hung like static in the air, buzzing with disbelief. The green glow of the scanner still pulsed faintly in Linda Hawthorne's trembling hand. It was a small, irrefutable light, a verdict against her doubts, against her certainty, against her prejudice, and yet she refused to accept it. Robert Hayes stood silently in front of the podium, the tension in his face almost imperceptible but unmistakable to anyone who had ever led people for a living. His calm was the kind that came before a storm, the stillness of someone measuring every second before speaking. Elijah Carter, meanwhile, remained poised, his shoulders squared, his face unreadable. "Mr. Hayes," Linda began, her voice brittle with panic. "I was just following protocol. This passenger's behavior seemed suspicious, and I thought Robert's eyes cut through her sentence like a blade. Suspicious." His tone was low, steady, suspicious because he asked you to do your job. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The terminal lights reflected on her pale skin, and for the first time since Elijah had arrived at the gate, she looked unsure of herself. Robert turned to Elijah, extending a hand. "Mr. Carter, I recognize you. We met briefly at the Global Ethics Forum 2 years ago. Didn't we?" Elijah hesitated, surprised by the memory. "That's right," he said. "You were the keynote on leadership transparency." Robert nodded. "Yes, not my proudest speech, but one I believed in." He glanced at the frozen scanner, then at the passengers now filming the scene on their phones. "I think we owe you more than words." Linda tried again. her voice sharp with desperation. "Sir, you don't understand. He refused to comply." "And I enough," Robert said, not raising his voice, but the single word sliced the air clean. "The scanner has spoken. The evidence is right there." He turned to the small crowd now growing around them. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this delay. You'll all be boarding shortly." Then, to Elijah, "Would you please come with me?" Elijah nodded, unsure where this was leading, but instinct told him to follow. The hallway leading to the boarding tunnel was quieter, dimmer. The noise of the terminal faded behind them, replaced by the muted hum of engines outside. Robert stopped halfway down the jet bridge, motioning for Elijah to stand beside him. His expression softened. "You shouldn't have had to experience that. Not here, not anywhere, and certainly not from my staff." "I appreciate that," Elijah said quietly. "But this isn't about me. It's about what that kind of behavior says about the system behind it." Robert's eyes flicked toward the terminal, where Linda still stood, clutching her badge as if it could shield her from consequence. "You're right," he said, "and systems don't change by accident." The two men stood in silence for a beat. Different lives, different worlds, yet both aware they were standing on a line that would divide the before and the after. Robert straightened. "I'll take care of this." He turned back toward the podium. The crowd had thinned slightly, but a few passengers still lingered, whispering among themselves. Linda looked up as Robert approached. "Sir, please." Linda," he interrupted, his tone cool and final. "Hand me your badge." Her eyes widened. "What you can't, I can," he said firmly, "and I am." Her lips trembled. "I was only protecting the company." We can't be too careful with what Robert snapped, and for the first time his composure cracked. "With customers who don't look like you, with people who make you uncomfortable." Her mouth quivered, but the words never came. She looked around, perhaps expecting someone to defend her, but the witnesses had turned silent. Even Tom Riley, the supervisor who had once hovered like a safety net, now stood motionless, guilt plastered across his face. "Mr. Riley," Robert said, his voice steady again, "escort Ms. Hawthorne to the operations office, effective immediately. She is suspended pending review." Tom nodded quickly, eyes darting away. "Yes, sir." Linda's voice cracked. "You can't just Robert cut her off. This company was built on trust. You broke it, and now you'll answer for it." She turned toward Elijah, her face a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You ruined me," she hissed. Elijah looked at her with quiet exhaustion. "No, you did that yourself." Security arrived moments later, guiding her away. The murmurs in the gate area grew louder, a mix of relief, discomfort, and awe. The spectacle of power had reversed itself completely. What had begun as a public humiliation for one man had become a reckoning for another. Robert turned to the crowd again, speaking clearly. "We are deeply sorry for what you just witnessed. This is not who we are or who we aim to be." He gestured toward Elijah. "Mr. Carter, please allow me to personally escort you on board." As they walked down the jet bridge, the passengers parted silently, making space for them. Some looked apologetic, some ashamed, others inspired. Maya, still holding her camera, lowered it slightly. She didn't need to film anymore. The image would stay in her mind forever. Inside the aircraft, the cabin lights were soft, the air crisp with that particular sterile scent of new leather and recycled air. The first-class section was a quiet sanctuary of polished chrome and muted beige. Elijah followed Robert to his seat, 2A, by the window. "Please, sit," Robert said. "I'll make sure you're comfortable." Elijah settled into the seat, his fingers tracing the edge of the armrest. For the first time that morning, the tension in his shoulders began to loosen. He wasn't sure if it was victory or just relief. Robert stood nearby, hands in his pockets. "You handled yourself with remarkable restraint back there. I don't think I would have had the same composure." Elijah looked up, his voice calm but pointed. "I've had practice." Robert nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of that truth. "I suppose you have." There was an awkward pause. Outside, ground crew loaded luggage into the plane. The low rumble of engines vibrated through the cabin floor. Robert spoke again, quieter this time. "You know, I built this airline on the belief that every passenger deserves to be treated with dignity. My father flew planes for 30 years. He taught me that the sky doesn't care what color you are, it only cares if you know how to fly." Elijah smiled faintly. "That's a good philosophy. Maybe it's time to make sure your people on the ground believe it too." "I will," Robert promised, "and I'd like your help." That caught Elijah off guard. "My help? I meant what I said earlier. Systems don't change by accident. You've spent your career studying how bias operates in algorithms, in hiring, in decisions. Maybe you could teach us something." Elijah hesitated. The wounds were still raw, the humiliation still stinging just beneath the surface. "Let's get through this flight first," he said gently. Robert nodded. "Fair enough." The seatbelt sign chimed, and the captain's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Skylink Flight 611 to San Francisco. Estimated flight time 4 hours and 20 minutes. Please fasten your seatbelts and enjoy the flight." As the plane began to taxi, Elijah glanced toward the window. The terminal lights blurred into streaks of gold against the gray morning. He thought of Ava, of how he'd tell her this story one day, not as a tale of anger, but of resilience. Grace Kim, the lead flight attendant, approached with a professional smile. "Mr. Carter, Mr. Hayes, can I offer you something to drink before takeoff? Just water." "Thank you," Elijah said. "Make that 2." Robert added. Grace nodded and left. When she returned, she set the glasses down gently. As she did, she whispered, "I'm so sorry for what happened. I saw part of it from the door. You didn't deserve that." Elijah met her eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You have no idea how much that means." She gave a small nod, the kind that said she understood more than she could say aloud, and moved on to the next row. The engines roared softly as the aircraft lifted off the runway. The city fell away beneath them, replaced by clouds white and endless. Elijah closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the morning finally drift from his body. But beneath the calm, a thought took root that a single act of courage or cruelty could ripple far beyond the walls of an airport. And somewhere deep down, he sensed that this was only the beginning, that the story of what happened at Gate C-18 would not end in that cabin. It would follow him, follow Skylink, and maybe, if handled right, change more than just a policy. As the plane climbed higher, Maya's video uploaded automatically to her cloud storage. She didn't know yet that by the time they landed, millions would have seen it. Elijah, unaware of the storm about to unfold online, simply stared out the window at the sunlight breaking through the clouds. For now, He allowed himself to rest, but far below, in the heart of O'Hare, a single phrase was already beginning a trend: Skylink Gate. The plane leveled out above the clouds, and sunlight streamed through the window beside Elijah Carter. The world below looked peaceful, like nothing bad could ever touch it. Inside the cabin, though, the quiet carried the residue of something sharp, something unresolved. Robert Hayes had returned to his seat across the aisle, reviewing notes on his tablet while Elijah stared absently out the window. His reflection looked back at him calm, contained, but not unshaken. He'd lived long enough to know that sometimes dignity came at the price of exhaustion. A soft chime signaled the beginning of in-flight service. Grace Kim moved gracefully down the aisle, her tone composed, professional, but her eyes still flickered with what she'd seen at the gate. She set down a tray in front of Elijah. "Lunch options today are grilled chicken or pasta primavera," she said quietly. "Chicken's fine," Elijah replied. His voice was calm, polite. It always was. Years of leadership had taught him that people listened better when you didn't sound like you were fighting. As she handed him a glass of water, she hesitated. "Mr. Carter," she whispered, leaning slightly closer. "I wanted to say again, I'm sorry for what happened back there. People were watching, but few spoke up. That wasn't right." Elijah looked up at her, his expression softening. "It's kind of you to say that. Most people see wrong and freeze. You didn't." Grace offered a small, almost embarrassed smile. "I guess I've seen too much of that silence. My mother used to say, if you see wrong and say nothing, you've chosen a side." He nodded slowly, letting the words settle. "Your mother's a wise woman." As she moved on, Elijah turned to his meal but didn't touch it. He could still feel the echo of Linda's voice, the way her accusation had wrapped around him like a chain. Suspicious, aggressive. The same words that had followed him through childhood, through business, through boardrooms that questioned how a black man could lead a company built on trust and ethics. He closed his eyes. He wanted to let the calm return, but calm wasn't coming. From the seat behind him came a faint whisper. Two passengers, an older couple, were talking quietly, though not quietly enough. "I can't believe that woman just said that," the wife murmured. "Yeah," the husband replied. "But you know what's worse? Everyone just watched. I almost said something, but you didn't," she finished, her tone heavy. "No," he admitted, "and now I wish I had." Elijah didn't turn around. He didn't need to. That guilt in the man's voice was familiar. It was the sound of realization too late to help, too early to forget. He sipped his water and tried to focus on his thoughts. He had a keynote to deliver in less than 24 hours. The irony wasn't lost on him. He would be standing in front of thousands, speaking about systemic bias, while being its victim just hours earlier. The absurdity of it almost made him laugh. The seatbelt light came on again as the plane hit mild turbulence. Robert looked up from his tablet, eyes meeting Elijah's across the aisle. For a moment, the CEO looked less like an executive and more like a man wrestling with guilt. He leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Carter, I know it's not my place to ask, but how often does something like this happen to you?" Elijah paused, then answered honestly, "Often enough that I stopped counting. Rarely as publicly as this, but the pattern's always the same." Robert frowned. "People assuming the worst. People assuming a story about me before they've heard my voice," Elijah said. It's not always anger or cruelty. Sometimes it's just disbelief that I belong where I am." Robert leaned back, his jaw tightening. "That's hard to hear. Harder to accept that it happened under my watch." Elijah studied him for a moment. "You're listening now. That's a start most people never make." The older man nodded, gratitude flickering behind his eyes. As if on cue, a chime sounded. Grace's voice came over the intercom. "If there are any medical professionals on board, please press your call button immediately." The calm shattered. A few rows back, a passenger, a middle-aged man, had slumped sideways in his seat. His wife was shaking him frantically. "Help! Somebody help him!" Elijah unbuckled his belt instinctively. Years of training and crisis management kicked in, not as a doctor, but as someone used to leading in emergencies. Grace was already there, her professionalism steady as she checked for a pulse. A nurse from economy hurried forward. Robert stood, helping clear space. The cabin felt smaller, heavier. Elijah stepped back to allow the nurse to work, but stayed close. Grace moved fast, grabbing the medical kit. Her hands shook slightly, but her focus never wavered. "He's breathing, but it's shallow," she said, glancing up. "Could be a cardiac episode." Robert turned to Elijah. "We may need to divert if it gets worse." Elijah nodded. "Do what you have to do." The nurse worked efficiently, the oxygen mask hissing softly. The man's wife sobbed quietly, clutching her husband's hand. A few passengers filmed the scene, unable to resist the impulse to document tragedy. After several tense minutes, the nurse looked up. "He's stabilizing. Keep the mask on him. He needs medical attention when we land, but he's out of immediate danger." Relief swept through the cabin like a wave. The passengers exhaled as one. Grace knelt beside the man's wife. "You did everything right, ma'am. He's going to be okay." The woman nodded tearfully, whispering, "Thank you. Thank you so much." As Grace stood, Elijah caught her eye. There was something in her look, something between exhaustion and pride. He gave a small nod of respect, and she returned it. Moments later, the plane's calm returned. But it wasn't the same calm as before. It was the fragile quiet that follows crisis, the kind that makes people reevaluate what matters. Robert sat down again, rubbing a hand over his face. You see that he muttered, strangers working together, no hesitation, no judgment, just action. Elijah nodded. That's what fairness looks like when fear isn't in the way. The CEO sighed. If only we could bottle that and serve it with every board and pass. The two men shared a faint, weary smile. An hour passed before anyone spoke again. The nurse checked on the patient periodically. Grace resumed service with a calm efficiency that only professionals in chaos possess. The passengers, subdued, seemed gentler now, aware that they had all witnessed something human. Elijah finally leaned back, closing his eyes. He thought about Linda, about how she must have felt when that scanner beeped. The sound that proved her wrong. Maybe, in her mind, she wasn't a villain. Maybe she believed she was protecting the company, protecting order. But the truth was simpler. She had been protecting comfort at the expense of someone else's dignity. He wondered how many others had done the same, in quieter ways, unseen. The intercom crackled again. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent into San Francisco shortly. Please ensure your seat belts are fastened. The descent felt longer than usual. Outside, the sun had started to dip, coloring the clouds in amber and rose. Elijah stared out, the skyline below glowing faintly like a memory of peace. Robert leaned toward him again. When we land, I'd like to arrange a formal apology. Not a PR stunt, something real. You deserve that. Elijah didn't answer immediately. He was tired of apologies. They were necessary, but they rarely repaired the deeper wound. Still, he recognized sincerity when he heard it. I appreciate that, he said finally, but what happens next matters more. Robert nodded. Then what happens next is change. As the wheels touched the runway, a gentle jolt rippled through the cabin. Passengers clapped softly, a reflex of relief more than gratitude. Elijah smiled faintly at the sound. When they taxied to the gate, Grace's voice returned over the intercom on behalf of Skylink Airways and the entire crew. We thank you for flying with us today. We hope to see you again soon. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. As passengers stood and gathered their belongings, whispers passed quietly between them. Some glanced at Elijah, then quickly looked away, unsure whether to say something. Maya, a few rows behind, caught his eye and lifted her phone slightly. "I'm posting it," she mouthed. He gave a small nod. He didn't know exactly what that would mean, but something deep inside him sensed it was already too late to stop the storm. The seatbelt sign turned off, and the cabin doors opened to the cool evening air of San Francisco. As Elijah stood to disembark, Robert gestured for him to go first. "After you, Mr. Carter. It's the least I can do." Elijah paused, then smiled faintly. "No, Mr. Hayes, the least is over." He stepped forward into the jet bridge, his carry-on in hand, his shoulders steady, behind him. Robert followed, silent and thoughtful. And miles away, in homes and offices across the country, phones began to buzz. Maya's video was spreading fast. The air inside San Francisco International felt different, saltier, quieter, heavier, with a kind of awareness that hadn't existed just hours before. Elijah Carter walked through the terminal with the unhurried grace of a man used to being observed. Robert Hayes followed beside him, his phone pressed to his ear, issuing brisk instructions to someone at corporate headquarters. Maya Thompson, a few steps behind, carried her camera like a witness carrying a truth she wasn't sure how to handle. Outside the airport's glass walls, the sun was falling behind the Pacific, painting the runways in amber light. Elijah stopped for a moment, watching the planes lift one by one into the glowing sky. He used to love that sight. It always reminded him of progress, of motion, of humanity pushing forward. Now it reminded him how fragile progress could be, how quickly it could stumble when someone decided you didn't belong among it. Robert ended his call. His jaw was set. "The board's already seen the footage," he said quietly. "It's spreading faster than I expected. Every network wants a statement." Elijah turned to him. "And what will you say?" Robert hesitated. That what happened was unacceptable. That we're investigating. Elijah gave a small, humorless smile. The standard script. Robert looked away, guilt flickering across his face. "I know, but I can't afford to sound defensive. Not now, not with millions of people watching. Millions are watching," Elijah said evenly, "because one woman thought my presence didn't match my ticket. If your response sounds rehearsed, they'll hear it." Robert sighed, the sound rough and human. "Then maybe you should tell me what to say." Elijah studied him, the offer hanging in the air like a test. "Say the truth," he said finally, "not what's safe. Say that what happened wasn't an accident, It's a symptom, and you're going to fix the disease, not just the PR. Robert nodded slowly, absorbing every word. You're right. They stood for a moment in silence. Behind them, people recognized Elijah whispers trailed like smoke. Some approached timidly. Others just stared. Maya noticed it all. The shift in how the crowd now looked at him, not suspicion this time, but awe, pity, admiration, a cocktail of emotions that never felt comfortable. Elijah, she said softly, the video's hit 500,000 views already. It's all over Twitter. He didn't respond right away. His mind was somewhere else on Ava, on his mother, on the countless times he'd told young black entrepreneurs to stay composed, to stay patient, to stay excellent. And yet, standing there, he felt the tremor of anger rise again, not the kind that lashes out, but the kind that carves deep, silent lines inside. He took a breath. Let's get to the hotel. The black sedan waiting for them hummed quietly as it pulled onto Highway 101. City lights blurred past, and for a few miles, no one spoke. The driver had recognized Elijah from the video, but wisely kept his thoughts to himself. Maya scrolled through her phone, the comments multiplying faster than she could read. Listen to this, she said softly. Another black man humiliated for existing in the wrong seat. Boycott Skylink. This man's composure is unreal. She paused. He shouldn't have to be this calm to be respected. Elijah's gaze stayed fixed on the road ahead. They're right, he said, but outrage fades faster than reform. Robert glanced at him. Then, maybe you should help me make sure it doesn't fade. When they arrived at the hotel, reporters were already outside, microphones raised like weapons of curiosity. Flashes went off as soon as the car door opened. Questions flew through the air. Carter, will you sue the airline? Do you believe this was racial profiling? Hayes, is Skylink racist? Elijah kept his composure, raising a hand politely. I'll address everything in due time. Right now. I'm tired, and I'm thinking, inside the lobby. Quiet replaced the chaos. Robert exhaled. We'll hold a press conference tomorrow morning. You'll have the floor first if you want it. Elijah nodded. If we're going to talk, we talk together. Robert smiled faintly. I think that's the only way this works. They parted ways at the elevator, Robert heading to a phone call upstairs. Maya lingering beside Elijah. I know this isn't what you wanted, she said softly, but the world's listening now. Elijah looked at her. Listening and hearing aren't the same thing. Still, he thanked her for filming, for being brave enough to record when everyone else looked away. In his room. Elijah sat by the window, city lights spilling over his reflection. The anger had cooled into something heavier, sadness wrapped in resolve. He picked up his phone and scrolled through messages. Dozens of texts, friends checking in, reporters requesting interviews, investors expressing solidarity in polished corporate language. And one message from Ava's grandmother. Ava saw the video. She's worried. I told her her dad handled it with grace. He stared at the words until they blurred. Then, slowly, he typed back, "Tell her I'll be home soon." And that fairness sometimes needs fire to survive. He set the phone down and closed his eyes. For a brief moment, sleep took him. When he woke, dawn had painted the sky pale blue. He showered, dressed in a charcoal suit, and looked at his reflection once more. The man, staring back, looked older than he had the day before, but stronger too. Downstairs. The conference room buzzed with energy. Cameras lined the back wall, reporters whispering, screens flickering with the Skylink logo. Robert stood near the podium, reading his notes. Grace Kim had been flown in overnight. Robert insisted she attend, saying, "People need to see what integrity looks like." As Elijah entered, the room fell slightly quieter. Robert turned, relief washing over his face. "You ready, as I'll ever be." The press conference began promptly at 9 a.m. Robert took the microphone first, his voice steady, practiced but sincere. "Yesterday, at O'Hare International Airport, one of our passengers, Mr. Elijah Carter, experienced treatment that was unacceptable and discriminatory on behalf of Skylink Airways. I want to apologize to him, to his family, and to every person who's ever felt unwelcome in a space they had every right to be." Cameras flashed, pens scratched across notebooks. Robert continued, "We've launched a full internal review. The employees involved have been suspended pending investigation. But, more importantly, we're examining the deeper issue how bias can hide inside policies, procedures, and people. We cannot fix what we refuse to see." He paused, then gestured toward Elijah. "Mr. Carter has graciously agreed to speak." Elijah stepped to the podium. The lights were bright, but his voice carried warmth that cut through them. "I didn't plan to become a headline," he began. "I was just trying to board a plane. But what happened wasn't about one woman or one flight. It's about something bigger, how we decide who belongs." He let that sit for a moment. "I stayed calm because I've had practice, but no one should need to be calm to be treated with basic respect. Dignity shouldn't depend on how composed you can stay under humiliation." The room went still. Even the clicking cameras paused. He continued, softer now. "When I looked into that scanner and saw the green light, I thought, finally, something sees me clearly. But the truth is, machines don't judge. People do, and people build the systems that define our lives." He looked directly at Robert. "The difference between a company and a community is accountability. I believe Skylink can become the latter." Robert nodded, emotion flickering in his eyes. "We will." When Elijah stepped away from the microphone, applause broke out, hesitant at first, then rising in strength. Not just from reporters, but from Skylink employees standing near the walls. Grace Kim's eyes glistened as she clapped quietly, her hands trembling slightly. As the conference ended, a journalist approached Elijah. "Mr. Carter, what comes next for you?" He smiled faintly. "Change. That's the only destination worth boarding for." Outside the hotel, the crowd was larger now, supporters holding signs that read, "Dignity has no class and we stand with Elijah." Maya filmed from the steps, her eyes shining behind the camera. She turned the lens toward him one last time. "Do you think this moment will really change anything?" she asked. Elijah looked out at the gathering crowd. "Moments don't change things," he said. "People do, but sometimes it takes a moment like this to remind them who they are." As Robert joined him, standing shoulder to shoulder, the chants grew louder. The two men shared a look, different worlds, different journeys, but now bound by the same storm. And somewhere in that noise, amidst the flashing lights and headlines, Elijah Carter felt the weight inside him shift. It wasn't gone, but it was lighter. The story was no longer his alone. It belonged to everyone who'd ever been told to prove they deserved a place they'd already earned. The morning after the press conference, The city of San Francisco woke to the sound of headlines echoing through radios, news feeds, and the steady hum of morning talk shows. The story had moved beyond outrage. It had become a mirror reflecting something far larger than one incident. News anchors spoke in rehearsed empathy. Commentators dissected every second of the viral video, and hashtags multiplied faster than truth could catch up. Elijah Carter stood by the window of his hotel suite. The city stretched before him like a painting of glass and fog. He hadn't slept. He'd spent most of the night reading messages, some from strangers thanking him for his restraint, others from people who'd lived similar humiliations, and a few from those who still refused to see the problem at all. The internet had a way of turning pain into spectacle, and he hated that his dignity had become someone else's trending topic. Down in the lobby, Robert Hayes waited with 2 security officers and a handful of corporate aides. The lines under his eyes were deeper than the day before. When Elijah finally descended, Robert rose immediately. "We have a situation," he said quietly. Elijah didn't ask what. He could tell from Robert's tone that something had shifted again. "Follow me," Robert said. "It's better if you see it yourself." They stepped into a conference room filled with screens. On one of them, a live feed showed protesters gathered outside Skylink's San Francisco headquarters, some holding signs of solidarity, others shouting for boycotts. Another screen showed an internal memo leaked online, a chain of emails where Linda Hawthorne had flagged Elijah's ticket as possibly fraudulent. Her note had included a phrase that, cut deep, doesn't fit the first-class profile. Elijah's stomach tightened. So this wasn't random. Robert's voice dropped. "No. It looks like she manually removed your seat assignment hours before boarding, claiming it was to verify payment. Then she reissued it at check-in without authorization. It's all there in the audit log." Elijah said nothing for a long moment. His mind replayed the humiliation at gate C-18, but now every word Linda had said carried a darker weight. She hadn't made a mistake. She'd made a decision. Robert continued. "The legal department is reviewing everything. HR wants to handle it quietly, but I've made it clear this won't be swept under the rug." Elijah studied him carefully. "And the board. What do they want?" Robert exhaled. "Containment, but I'm done containing what shouldn't have existed in the first place." There was a conviction in his voice that hadn't been there before. Elijah recognized it the moment when guilt turns into responsibility. "Linda's been terminated," Robert added. "Tom Riley resigned this morning. I spoke with Grace Kim personally. She'll be promoted to lead instructor for our diversity training program." "That's good," Elijah said softly. "She deserves it." Robert nodded, then looked directly at Elijah. "But that's not enough. You said yesterday that systems don't change by accident. I need your help to design one that actually works." Elijah hesitated. "You want me to consult for Skylink? I want you to audit it." Robert said, "Externally, honestly, no PR spin. I want you to tell me where we're failing, not just on paper, but in culture." Elijah crossed his arms, thinking. He could already see the headlines, the victim who became the advisor. It sounded noble, but it also sounded exhausting. "You're asking me to walk back into the same system that humiliated me," he said quietly. Robert met his gaze. "I'm asking you to help rebuild it so no one else has to." The room fell silent. The buzz of the monitors filled the space between them. Finally, Elijah said, "If I do this, it's on one condition. You can't just fix procedures, you have to fix people. That means accountability at every level. And it won't be pretty. Robert nodded. I didn't come this far to keep things pretty. They shook hands, and in that moment, something shifted again, not a clean resolution, but the fragile start of reform. Outside, the noise of protests grew louder. Maya Thompson, ever the journalist, was among them. Her camera focused on faces angry, hopeful, tired. She wasn't filming chaos, she was filming history in real time. Later that afternoon, Robert held a private meeting at Skylink headquarters. The board members, polished and composed, sat around a long oak table. Some looked uncomfortable, others defiant. This isn't about a single employee, Robert began. It's about culture, about the subtle ways we decide who belongs, and about what we'll do to change it. One board member, a silver-haired man named Charles Denton, leaned forward. With respect, Robert, we can't let emotions dictate policy. One viral video doesn't justify overhauling an entire company. Robert's expression hardened. If you think this is about a video, you've missed the point. Denton shrugged. Optics matter, but let's not overreact. People forget quickly. The storm will pass. Elijah, seated quietly at the end of the table, finally spoke. That's the problem, he said. His tone was calm but firm. You're betting on people's attention span instead of earning their trust. That's not leadership. It's survival. The room went silent. Robert glanced at Elijah, a flicker of pride in his eyes. Mr. Carter's right. This isn't about managing perception. It's about repairing integrity. We'll start with an independent audit, his audit, and a full review of every incident report from the past 5 years. Denton opened his mouth to object, but Robert cut him off. If anyone has an issue with that, my office door is open, but make sure you bring your resignation letter when you walk through it. The meeting ended in uneasy quiet as the executives filed out. Elijah lingered by the window, watching the protesters below. He could see signs that read, "Respect is not a policy in justice" at 30,000 feet. The irony wasn't lost on him. Robert joined him. They're not wrong, he said. Respect can't just be a training module. Elijah smiled faintly. No, it's a muscle, and most people forget to use it until it atrophies. Robert laughed quietly. Then I guess we have a lot of exercising to do. They shared a brief silence, the kind born from mutual understanding rather than words. That evening, Elijah walked along the Embarcadero, needing air. The sky was streaked with orange, the bay glittering like spilled light. His phone buzzed another message from Ava's grandmother. Ava watched your speech, she said. Daddy speaks calm like water, but hits like truth. Elijah smiled, the tightness in his chest easing. He typed back, "Tell her I learned that from her." As he pocketed his phone, footsteps approached. It was Maya, her camera slung over one shoulder. "You disappeared right after the meeting," she said, falling into step beside him. "Needed a moment," he replied. "I think everyone needs one after today." She said, "By the way, the video hit 10 million views." He shook his head, half amused, half weary. People love a scandal more than a solution. "Maybe," she said, "but sometimes a scandal forces people to see what they've ignored." They stopped at the edge of the pier, the wind cool against their faces. "Do you think they'll really change?" she asked. Elijah looked out at the horizon. Change doesn't start in boardrooms. It starts in hearts. But I've learned something about storms. They clear the air before anything can grow." Maya smiled. "That sounds like the end of a speech." "Maybe," he said, turning to her with a faint grin. "Or maybe just the start of another one." Back at Skylink headquarters, Robert sat alone in his office, the city lights glowing through the glass. On his desk lay a small photograph of his father in pilot uniform, smiling beside an old propeller plane. Robert whispered under his breath, "We're fixing it. Dad, we'll do better." For the first time in years, he believed it. By the end of the week, Elijah Carter's name was everywhere on morning talk shows, in op-eds, across social media feeds, and even discussed on late-night television. Yet, for all the noise, Elijah had stayed quiet. He hadn't given interviews, declined all invitations, and turned down book deals and brand partnerships. He wasn't interested in becoming a symbol or a spectacle. What he wanted, what he needed, was change that lasted longer than the Internet's memory. Robert Hayes, on the other hand, had entered the storm head-on. The CEO of Skylink appeared on every major network, not with a defensive script, but with humility. His voice was calm, his words deliberate. "We failed a passenger who did everything right," he said on one broadcast, "and that means we failed ourselves." That line, "we failed ourselves," was quoted, tweeted, and replayed across the country. For the first time, people began talking about accountability not as punishment, but as growth. Inside Skylink's headquarters, real work had begun. Grace Kim stood at the front of a sleek conference room filled with new hires and seasoned staff alike. On the screen behind her was a still frame from the now infamous video the moment Linda had accused Elijah of fraud. "This," Grace said, her voice steady, "is what happens when perception replaces protocol. We're not here to memorize rules. We're here to relearn empathy." She clicked to the next slide, a scene showing passengers stepping in to defend Elijah. These people didn't have training. She continued, "They had conscience. That's what we need to build into our systems." At the back of the room, Elijah observed silently. He'd been consulting for 2 weeks now, working alongside Robert and Grace to design a new framework for Skylink's operations, one that prioritized awareness and human dignity over efficiency metrics. After the session ended, Grace approached him. "You think it's working?" Elijah smiled faintly. "They're listening. That's a start." She sighed, glancing back at the empty chairs. "I used to think fairness could be taught in slides and bullet points. Now, I think it has to be experienced." "You're right," he said. "Experience is the best teacher. Unfortunately, mine came with a ticket and a price." Grace gave a small nod, her eyes soft with understanding. "I think it's making a difference, even if it's slow." Later that evening, Elijah met with Robert in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the bay. The city shimmered below them, a reminder that progress was never quiet. It always glowed brightest against the dark. Robert leaned forward, exhaustion etched into the corners of his eyes. "You know, when I started this company 20 years ago, I thought success meant control. Control of planes, control of image, control of everything. But lately, I've realized success might be the ability to let go." Elijah chuckled softly. "Control's a comforting illusion. Systems, people, they all have variables you can't predict. What you can do is design for decency." Robert smiled, decency as a business strategy. "I like that." A pause lingered between them, filled with quiet reflection. Then Robert's tone shifted. "There's something else I wanted to talk to you about. The Department of Transportation is opening a federal inquiry. They want to meet with you next week. Apparently, they see this as a case study in systemic reform." Elijah blinked, surprised. "You're serious." "Completely," Robert said. "They're talking about implementing similar programs across all major airlines. You started something bigger than either of us expected." Elijah leaned back, absorbing the weight of those words. "Bigger than us," he repeated softly. "That's the goal." "Isn't it always has been," Robert said. The next morning, Elijah woke to a text from Maya Thompson. "Meet me at Civic Center Plaza. You need to see this." He arrived to find a sea of people gathered beneath the California morning sun. Handmade signs filled the air. "Respect takes flight. We stand with Elijah, justice in the skies." The energy was different from the earlier protests. It wasn't rage, it was resolve. Maya was there with her camera, her face lit by the glow of a new purpose. "You're not just a story anymore," she told him. "You're a movement." Elijah shook his head. "No, I'm a reminder. The movement is everyone else." Still, as the crowd spotted him, a ripple went through the plaza. People began to clap, not for celebrity, but for courage, for grace, for the idea that one man's calm defiance could shake an institution into accountability. Maya caught the moment on film. Later that day, her footage would go viral again. Not the kind of viral born from outrage, but the kind born from hope. That night, Elijah sat in his apartment overlooking the bay, sipping tea while the city lights blinked below like 1,000 restless thoughts. His phone buzzed again. This time it was an unknown number. He answered. Elijah Carter, a woman's voice asked. "Yes." "Who's speaking?" "This is Deputy Secretary Monica Ellsworth from the Department of Transportation. I wanted to personally thank you. Your experience has sparked a full review of passenger treatment protocols. We'd like you to join our advisory committee." He paused. "Are you sure you want someone who just called out an entire industry?" She chuckled lightly. "That's exactly who we need." When the call ended, Elijah sat in silence, absorbing the enormity of it all. He had walked into an airport 2 months ago just trying to get to a meeting. Now he was helping redefine how people were treated at 30,000 feet. He thought about Ava, about the world she'd inherit. Maybe this was how it started, not with speeches or revolutions, but with one quiet act of standing your ground. The next few weeks moved quickly. The Skylink training model, Empathy in Motion, rolled out across major airports. Grace became the face of the program, appearing in interviews, speaking with poise and conviction. Robert Hayes received cautious praise from industry peers. Though some accused him of virtue signaling, he ignored them. Elijah continued consulting, his role expanding into policy advisory for multiple organizations. But the deeper he went, the more he realized something profound. Reform wasn't about erasing bias. It was about acknowledging humanity's capacity to grow beyond it. Late one evening, after another long session at the Department of Transportation, Elijah walked through the quiet streets near the Capitol. The cherry blossoms were in bloom, petals scattering across the sidewalk like fragments of a gentler world. Maya called. "I just got word your name's trending again." He sighed softly. "What for this time?" "Someone found the video of you talking to the Skylink trainees," she said. "The part where you said, Dignity shouldn't be earned, it should be automatic. It's everywhere. He chuckled, a warm, tired sound. I meant every word. I know, Maya said. That's why it hit so hard. Elijah stopped at a bench, watching the evening settle around the monuments. Do you ever worry? He asked quietly. The people will move on before the lesson sticks. Maya's voice softened. They always do, but they'll remember how they felt. That's what lasts. He smiled. Then maybe that's enough. As he hung up, a cool breeze passed through the trees. Somewhere nearby, a street musician played a saxophone, the notes drifting like pieces of memory. Elijah closed his eyes and listened. The city was alive, imperfect but striving, just like the people in it. For the first time in a long while, he felt something close to peace. Across the country, in living rooms, offices, and classrooms. People were still watching the story unfold not just as a scandal, but as a shift. Teachers discussed it in ethics lessons, companies reviewed their bias training, and travelers shared stories of kindness they'd witnessed on their own flights. The ripple was spreading. In one small airport in Texas, a young gate agent stood facing a nervous family struggling with their tickets. The grandmother spoke broken English. The agent smiled gently, crouched to eye level, and said, "It's okay. We'll figure it out together." Then she scanned the tickets, fixed the issue, and walked them through the gate herself. Above her desk was a small sign that read, "Every passenger deserves a first-class welcome." Somewhere, Elijah Carter would have smiled. 3 months after the scandal that shook Skylink Airways, the story of Elijah Carter had evolved from a viral moment into a global case study. Universities analyzed it in ethics classes. HR departments cited it during leadership seminars, and news outlets occasionally revisited it whenever another company faced its own reckoning. Yet, behind the spotlight, Elijah's life had grown quieter, almost deceptively ordinary. He still worked as CEO of Novosphere Tech, still ran every morning before dawn, still called his daughter Ava before bedtime no matter where he was. But there was a weight now, a subtle, invisible gravity that came with being seen not just as a man, but as a symbol. And symbols, he was learning, were expected to be flawless. It was late evening when his phone rang. Robert Hayes' name flashed on the screen. "Elijah," Robert began, his voice tight. "We've got a situation." Elijah leaned back in his chair. "What kind of situation?" "The backlash kind," Robert said grimly. "One of our pilots, James Rowe, was recorded mocking the new diversity training during a layover. The video hit social media an hour ago. He called it, quote, woke nonsense." Elijah sighed. "And let me guess, it's already everywhere." "Everywhere," Robert confirmed. "And people are saying Skylink's reforms are just for show, that we're pretending to care." Elijah rubbed his temple. "What's your next move? I'm flying to Dallas tonight to meet the union and the crew involved," Robert said. "But I need your advice. Do we fire him or try to educate him?" There was a long pause. "If you fire him immediately, people will call it censorship," Elijah said finally. "If you keep him, they'll say you condone it. Either way, someone will scream hypocrisy." Robert's frustration was audible through the line. "So, what do, you lead?" Elijah replied softly, "You make the hard choice, not the loud one." The following day, news outlets ran with the story Skylink faces new turbulence. Reporters camped outside the company's Dallas Operations Center, eager for another headline. Inside, tensions were high. Employees whispered in hallways, unsure whether the company's new values would hold under pressure. When Robert arrived, cameras followed. He didn't hide behind PR staff or legal advisors. Instead, he stood before the press and said, "Change doesn't come without resistance. We're not here to punish opinions. We're here to challenge them. Captain Rowe's actions will face review, and he will undergo additional training before any decision is made." Accountability isn't about firing fast. It's about learning deep. It was a bold move, and predictably, it divided the internet. Some praised him for maturity, others accused him of weakness. Elijah, watching from San Francisco, couldn't help but smile. Robert was finally doing what true leaders did, standing in discomfort. Later that week, Elijah flew to Dallas to help mediate the internal meetings. As he entered Skylink's operations center, he noticed something that hadn't been there before: framed photographs of passengers and employees, diverse, smiling, human. The tagline beneath them read, "Every journey deserves respect." Grace Kim met him at the door, her energy bright despite the long hours she'd been putting in running the training division. "You're just in time," she said. "Robert's with the Pilots' Council now. It's intense." Inside the meeting room, the air was thick. A dozen pilots sat around the table, most of them veterans of the industry. Captain Rowe sat near the end, arms crossed, face unreadable. Robert began, "We're not here to shame anyone, but we can't ignore what's happened." Rowe leaned forward, his tone sharp but controlled. "With all due respect, sir, pilots are trained to fly planes, not politics. I didn't mean harm. It was a joke taken out of context." Elijah, seated quietly beside Robert, finally spoke. "You said the training was nonsense. Can I ask what part felt that way to you?" Rowe hesitated. "Look, Mr. Carter, I get that discrimination's real. I do. But I've been flying 20 years. I treat everyone the same. I don't need a slideshow to tell me how to do my job." Elijah nodded slowly. "I don't doubt your professionalism, but the thing about fairness is, it's not about how you feel you treat people. It's about how safe people feel around you. That's not something experience alone teaches." The room went silent. Rowe looked down, uncomfortable but thoughtful. Robert added gently, "We're not here to accuse you. We're here to ask for your help. You've flown longer than most of us. Help us show that experience and empathy can fly together." For the first time, Rowe's shoulders eased. "You really think this program's going to change anything?" Elijah smiled faintly. "It already has. You're here, aren't you?" By the end of the session, something had shifted. Rowe didn't apologize publicly, but he stayed behind afterward, speaking quietly with grace. It wasn't redemption, it was a beginning. That night, Robert and Elijah met in the rooftop lounge of their hotel. Below them, Dallas sparkled in the warm haze of summer heat. You ever feel like every step forward costs twice as much effort as it should? Robert asked, nursing his drink. Always. Elijah said, change is expensive, but stagnation costs more. Robert chuckled wearily. You sound like a professor. I sound like a man who's paid both prices, Elijah said with a small smile. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the hum of the city below. After a while, Robert said, You know, when this all started, I thought I was fixing a PR nightmare. Turns out I was fixing myself. Elijah looked at him. That's how it works. The system changes when the people inside it do. A few weeks later, Skylink launched a nationwide campaign titled Respect Takes Flight, featuring real employees sharing stories of empathy and accountability. One segment showed Grace Kim narrating her journey from witness to reformer. Another showed a pilot, Captain Rowe, speaking honestly about what he'd learned from the experience. "It's not about being perfect," he said on camera. "It's about being present." The campaign resonated far beyond aviation. Schools, hospitals, and corporations reached out to Skylink for guidance on their own inclusion programs. Even critics admitted that the airline had done something rare, turned scandal into substance. Meanwhile, Elijah received an invitation to speak at Harvard Business School. The auditorium was packed students, executives, journalists, even a few politicians. His talk wasn't about race or outrage. It was about empathy as infrastructure. Empathy, he told them, isn't softness, it's strategy. It's what keeps companies human when profit tempts them to forget. The room rose in applause. But for Elijah, the real victory came weeks later when a young man wrote to him, "I used to think people like me didn't belong in boardrooms. Then I saw your story. Now I'm applying to business school." He read the message twice, then smiled quietly. Back in San Francisco, Ava ran to him as soon as he walked through the door. "Daddy, my class watched your video today," she said, eyes shining. "My teacher said you're helping make airplanes fair." Elijah laughed softly, kneeling to hug her. "That's the goal, sweetheart, to make sure everyone gets where they're going safely and with respect." She looked up at him, thoughtful. "Does that mean no more mean people?" He paused, smiling sadly. "Maybe not, but maybe fewer mean moments." As she ran off to play, Elijah stood by the window, watching planes arc gracefully through the sunset. The sound reminded him of that day in Chicago, the moment his life had cracked open. Now, it felt like a scar that had healed into something stronger. On his desk sat a letter from Robert. "We're rolling out empathy in motion internationally. You were right. Change doesn't fly on autopilot." Elijah folded the letter carefully and placed it beside a framed photo of Ava. Outside, the last light faded, and the hum of engines in the distance became a lullaby of persistence. The world wasn't perfect. It never would be. But for the first time in a long while, Elijah believed it was learning how to try. The following winter arrived quietly, cloaking San Francisco into silver-gray mornings and a sense of weary calm. Elijah Carter sat in his office at Novasphere Tech, overlooking the bay through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city shimmered faintly in the rain, like a memory of progress that refused to fade. He'd been working nonstop consultations, speeches, and now the early drafts of a government white paper on bias reform in the travel industry. On the surface, everything looked like success, but beneath it, something unspoken churned. For months, Elijah had been running on resolve. Now, the silence was catching up to him. Every public appearance, every headline that still mentioned his name, carried invisible pressure. People called him the face of modern fairness. It was meant as praise, but it felt like a cage. He was reviewing a document when his assistant, Clara, entered with a hesitant knock. "Mr. Carter," she said gently, "there's someone here to see you. She says it's important." Elijah frowned. "Who Linda Hawthorne?" she replied quietly. The name froze him. He hadn't heard it spoken aloud in months. "You're sure?" Clara nodded. "She says she doesn't want trouble, just a few minutes." For a long moment, Elijah said nothing. Then he stood. "Send her in." When Linda entered, She looked almost unrecognizable. The sharp confidence she once carried was gone, replaced by a tired fragility. She held her purse like a shield, eyes darting between the floor and his face. "Mr. Carter," she began softly, "thank you for seeing me." Elijah gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "Have a seat." She hesitated before sitting. I know I'm the last person you want to see, but I've been trying to reach out for months. I lost everything, and maybe I deserved to, but I need to tell you what really happened that day." Elijah leaned back, arms folded. His voice was calm, almost detached. "I think I already know what happened. You saw someone who didn't fit your idea of a first-class passenger." Her face tightened. "That's what it looked like. I know, but it wasn't just that. Someone in operations flagged your booking. They said it was part of a fraud check." She swallowed. "I didn't question it. I should have. I just followed the note in the system. It wasn't until later that I realized my actions made me the face of something much uglier." Elijah's expression softened slightly, though his tone stayed measured. "And now you want to clear your name?" Linda shook her head. "No, I just want you to know I wasn't trying to humiliate you. I was scared of losing control. Everything that day moved too fast, and when I saw people filming, I panicked. After it all went public, my husband left, my son stopped speaking to me. I got death threats." Her voice trembled. "I'm not excusing anything. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, not for the cameras or the headlines, but for the moment I forgot you were human." The room fell silent except for the rain tapping against the glass. Elijah didn't speak immediately. He thought of all the nights he'd replayed that moment, her voice, the sting of her accusation, and of how many times he'd wished she'd said exactly these words. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but steady. "I accept your apology, Ms. Hawthorne, but I can't erase what happened. Neither of us can. What we can do is decide what to do with what's left." She nodded, tears welling. "I understand." Before leaving, she handed him a small envelope. "This is a letter I wrote months ago. I didn't know where to send it. Maybe it belongs with you." When she was gone, Elijah opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten note. "You taught me that humility isn't weakness. It's the beginning of change. I hope someday I can prove that I learned." He folded it carefully, placing it inside a drawer. The anger he once carried had already faded, but now something new took its place, closure. That evening, Elijah walked along the pier outside his building. The rain had stopped, and the air was crisp with sea salt. He thought about Linda, about Robert, about Grace and Maya, and all the strangers who had become part of a story larger than themselves. Change was never one loud revolution. It was thousands of quiet reckonings. A few days later, Elijah flew to Washington, D.C., to present his findings to the Department of Transportation. Robert Hayes met him at the hotel. They greeted each other like old comrades, no handshakes, just a warm, brief hug. "You ready for the big stage again?" Robert asked. Elijah chuckled softly. "I thought I left the stage behind." Robert smiled. "You didn't. You just built a better one." The next morning, in a grand hearing room lined with press and officials, Elijah stood behind a simple wooden podium. Grace Kim sat behind him as part of the Skylink delegation, while Maya filmed discreetly from the side. The air buzzed with anticipation. Elijah began. "Ladies and gentlemen, Progress isn't measured by the policies we write. It's measured by the people who feel safe enough to trust them. What happened to me on that flight wasn't an isolated event. It was a reflection of habits, some conscious, some not that shape how institutions behave. He paused, meeting the eyes of the officials before him. We've built machines that can fly across oceans, but we're still learning how to treat each other with altitude-worthy respect. Soft laughter rippled through the audience. Then silence, as he continued. The goal isn't perfection, it's awareness. Systems can't learn empathy, but the people who run them can. And when they do, everything else follows. He finished to a standing ovation. Cameras flashed, pens scribbled, and somewhere in the crowd, Robert was smiling like a proud older brother. Grace wiped a tear discreetly, and Maya caught it all on film. That night, at a small restaurant near the Capitol, the group celebrated quietly. Over dinner, Robert raised his glass. To Elijah Carter, he said, for proving that dignity can rewrite policy. Elijah lifted his glass too, to all of us, for proving that humility can fly higher than ego. Laughter filled the table. For a rare moment, everything felt light again. Later, when the others had left, Maya lingered. There's something poetic about this. You know, she said, you started with one confrontation at an airport, and now you're helping rebuild an entire system. Elijah smiled, eyes thoughtful. Poetic, maybe, but it's also unfinished. What do you mean, she asked. He looked out the window at the Capitol dome glowing softly under the night sky. Change isn't a destination. Maya, it's a relay. You pass the baton and hope someone else keeps running. She nodded slowly, understanding. Then I guess your story isn't over yet. He smiled. No, but maybe this chapter is. When he returned to San Francisco a few days later, Ava met him at the airport. She ran into his arms, her laughter bright and unburdened. Daddy, guess what? My class is doing a project about fairness. I told them you help people remember how to be kind. Elijah's throat tightened. That's a good project, he said softly. As they walked toward the exit, a flight attendant passing by recognized him. Mr. Carter, she said shyly, I just wanted to say thank you. My whole team watched your speech. It changed how we see passengers and ourselves. Elijah smiled. Thank you for saying that. Keep that feeling. That's how real change lasts. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting gold across the tarmac. Planes took off one after another, each one a quiet symbol of forward motion. Elijah looked at Ava, then at the sky, and felt a peace he hadn't known since before all this began. The journey had started with humiliation, but it was ending with understanding. Spring returned to San Francisco with quiet certainty. The air was warmer, the fog thinner, and life at Novosphere Tech had settled into a steady rhythm. Elijah Carter spent his mornings running along the Embarcadero, the sound of the waves steadying his thoughts. It had been almost a year since that flight, the one that had changed everything. In that time, the world had shifted in small but noticeable ways. Airlines across the country had adopted new inclusivity programs modeled after Skylink's. Colleges were teaching the Carter case as part of leadership ethics. Yet, for Elijah, the question that lingered was simpler and heavier after all the noise. Had humanity really changed, or had it only paused long enough to notice itself? One Thursday morning, Elijah received an unexpected email from Harvard Business Review requesting an in-depth interview about the long-term effects of his story. He hesitated before replying. He had grown wary of interviews. Too many of them chased sensationalism, not substance. Still, something about this one felt right, an opportunity to reflect rather than defend. He agreed, on one condition that the conversation focus not on the scandal, but on the future. Later that day, he called Robert Hayes. The older man's voice came through warm but slightly strained. "You're not going to believe this," Robert said, "but Skylink just won the Aviation Ethics Award. The same people who once questioned us are now calling us the benchmark." Elijah smiled. "That's a strange kind of poetry." Robert chuckled. "It is, and it's partly yours." "Maybe," Elijah said, "but the poem's not done yet." That evening, as the city lights shimmered on the bay, Elijah met Maya Thompson at a small cafe downtown. She'd been working on a documentary titled Flight Path: The Story That Changed the Skies. Her camera was smaller now, her movements quieter, her eyes carrying the calm focus of someone who had learned the difference between documenting and understanding. "Do you ever get tired of being the man who started it all?" she asked, setting her recorder on the table. Elijah stirred his coffee slowly. "Sometimes. Mostly, I get tired of being the man people want to finish it." Maya smiled faintly. "You know, that's exactly why your story matters. It's not a movie with an ending. It's a reminder." He looked at her thoughtfully. "Reminders fade if people stop caring." "Not always," she said. "Sometimes they turn into habits." Their conversation drifted from policy to purpose, from history to hope. Maya mentioned that Grace Kim had been invited to lead a training session for an international airline alliance. "She's nervous," Maya said, "but I told her she's ready. She's living proof that one person's courage can outlast a scandal." Elijah smiled. She was ready the day she refused to stay silent. That same week, Grace called Elijah late one night. Her voice was calm but carried a tremor of emotion. "I just wanted you to know," she said. "My mother passed away this morning. She'd been sick for a while." Elijah's voice softened. "Grace, I'm so sorry. She watched your congressional speech last year." Grace continued. "She told me before she passed, 'That man speaks like someone who's forgiven the world but still expects it to do better.' I thought you'd want to know." For a moment, Elijah couldn't find words. "That's one of the kindest things anyone's ever said about me," he finally whispered. Grace exhaled shakily. She believed in second chances. She said the world needs more of those. When the call ended, Elijah sat in silence for a long time, the city's hum blending with his thoughts. The idea of forgiveness had always been both his strength and his burden. Forgiveness demanded compassion, but it also demanded memory. He couldn't forget what had happened, but he could choose what to do with it. A week later, Elijah traveled to New York for the interview. The studio was sleek, glass-walled, and bathed in soft light. The interviewer, a woman named Patricia Monroe, began with a smile. "Mr. Carter, millions saw your calm during that confrontation. Most said you handled it with grace, but what was happening inside?" In that moment, Elijah hesitated before answering. "Inside, I was tired. Not angry, just tired of proving that dignity should be automatic. But staying calm wasn't about pride. It was about control. When you're a black man in that kind of situation, losing your temper doesn't make you human. It makes you a headline." Patricia nodded. Do you think the world is changing? He thought carefully. I think it's learning to look itself in the mirror, but real change doesn't happen in statements or awards. It happens in the small moments when no one's watching, when a gate agent chooses to listen, or when a manager decides not to assume. She smiled gently. You've become a symbol of progress. Does that responsibility ever feel heavy? Elijah chuckled softly. Every day. But I don't carry it alone anymore. That's what progress looks like when the burden becomes shared. After the interview, Patricia reached out to shake his hand. Thank you, she said, not just for your words, but for your stillness. People forget how powerful stillness can be. He smiled. Stillness isn't the absence of movement. It's the presence of purpose. The episode aired a week later and was met with an outpouring of response. But for Elijah, the most meaningful message came from an unlikely source, a short email from Captain James Rowe, the pilot who had once mocked Skylink's reforms. Mr. Carter. The message began. I wanted to tell you that I just finished leading my first empathy training session for new pilots. I used to think these programs were theater. I was wrong. It turns out that when you make people see themselves in others, the cockpit feels lighter. Thank you for being patient enough to prove me wrong. Elijah smiled as he read it, his heart swelling with a quiet pride that words could barely hold. Change didn't need to be loud, it just needed to be real. Weeks later, Elijah returned to Chicago for the first time since the day everything began. The same airport that had once been a stage for humiliation now displayed a framed photograph of him shaking hands with Robert Hayes under a banner that read Integrity in Motion. Passengers walked past it without knowing the full story, and that was fine. It meant the lesson had outgrown the man. As he stood near the terminal window, watching planes take off, Robert joined him. You didn't tell me you were coming, Robert said, smiling. I wasn't sure I was ready, Elijah admitted. Robert nodded, and now Elijah took a slow breath. Now I think I'm finally at peace. Robert looked out at the runway. You know, sometimes I think about that day. If I hadn't been there, if that scanner hadn't beeped, none of this would have happened. Elijah smiled faintly. Maybe it was always going to happen. Sometimes the universe lets a wound open so we can see what needs healing. They stood in silence as a Skylink jet soared into the sunset, its logo gleaming like a promise. That evening, Elijah returned home. Ava was waiting at the door, holding a piece of paper. Daddy, we had to write about our heroes today, she said proudly. He knelt down, smiling. Can I see? She handed him the paper. Her handwriting was clumsy but full of heart. My hero is my dad. He teaches people to be kind even when the world forgets how. Elijah blinked back tears. That's beautiful, sweetheart. Ava grinned. My teacher said it made her cry a little. He laughed, scooping her into his arms, you and me both, that night, after she fell asleep. Elijah stepped onto the balcony. The moon hung above the bay, full and bright. Somewhere out there, a plane's lights blinked against the dark, steady and certain. He thought about legacy not as fame or recognition, but as the invisible ripple of decency passed from one heart to another. Maybe that was the real victory. Not proving the world wrong, but helping it remember what right looked like. He whispered to the night, almost like a prayer, may the skies always rise with respect, and in the stillness that followed, the world seemed to listen. By summer, Elijah Carter's life had settled into a rhythm that felt almost unfamiliar, one defined not by crisis or public attention, but by steady purpose. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that was slowly, cautiously learning from its aftermath. Novosphere Tech thrived under his leadership. Skylink Airways had rebuilt its image with humility, and the movement his story had ignited once a viral flame had matured into something quieter, deeper, and more enduring. Yet, even in calm waters, Elijah never stopped listening for the currents beneath. He knew progress was fragile. Real change didn't announce itself with fanfare. It whispered in everyday choices, in moments when no one was recording. One afternoon, while preparing for a panel discussion at Stanford, he received a call from Grace Kim. Her voice carried a mix of pride and exhaustion. "We just finished the final phase of our global training," she said. 32 countries, over 6,000 staff trained, some airports even named lounges after the program. Elijah smiled. "You've done incredible work, Grace." She laughed lightly. "We've done it. Elijah, you started the spark, we just kept it alive. How's your team holding up?" he asked. She paused. "Good, mostly, but I've noticed something strange lately. The more we talk about empathy, the more some people push back. They say it's all performative, that compassion can't be institutionalized." Elijah leaned back in his chair. "That's because they think empathy is a feeling. It's not. It's a practice. Feelings fade. Habits shape culture." Grace sighed in agreement. I needed to hear that. After they hung up, Elijah stared out the window. The bay shimmered under the afternoon sun, planes tracing thin silver lines across the sky. He thought about how far they'd come and how far there still was to go. A few days later, he met Robert Hayes for lunch in San Francisco. Robert looked older, though not weaker. There was a lightness about him now, a man who'd made peace with the turbulence of his past. "I've been thinking about retiring," Robert said between sips of coffee. 50 years in the air, 40 on the ground. It might be time. Elijah raised an eyebrow. "You sure you're ready to land?" Robert chuckled. "Maybe not, but I want to leave Skylink while it's flying, right?" They sat in silence for a while, the kind of quiet only long friendship could hold. Then Robert said, "There's something else. The board wants to name our new leadership program after you, the Carter Initiative." Elijah looked startled. "Robert, that's not necessary. It's not about you," Robert said gently. "It's about what you stand for. Dignity, accountability, fairness. This isn't charity, it's compass work." Elijah smiled faintly. "Then promise me one thing, it won't be a monument. It'll be a movement." Robert nodded. "That's the only kind worth building." The following month, Maya Thompson's documentary Flight Path. The story that changed the skies premiered at an independent film festival in Los Angeles. The theater was small, but the crowd was full pilots, journalists, students, activists, and families who had followed the story from the beginning. When the lights dimmed, Elijah sat near the back, Ava beside him, her small hand tucked into his. The film opened with archival footage, the chaos at Gate C-18, the tense confrontation, the scan that changed everything. But then it moved beyond the scandal, weaving stories of transformation, Grace's journey, Robert's reckoning, and the ripple of kindness that had spread across the industry. At one point, the screen showed Captain James Rowe leading a training session. his voice steady and sincere. "Empathy isn't political correctness," he said in the film. "It's precision in humanity." The audience fell silent. When the credits rolled, applause filled the theater. Maya walked onto the stage to introduce Elijah. The crowd stood, clapping, cheering not with the frenzy of celebrity, but with the warmth of gratitude. Elijah took the microphone, his tone gentle and steady. "Thank you," he began. "This film isn't about me. It's about what we're capable of when we decide to do better. Every person in this room has a gate, a moment, a decision where they can choose humanity over habit. That's where revolutions begin, not in noise, but in silence." Afterward, in the lobby, people approached him with stories, small acts of courage they'd taken since his ordeal. A teacher who rewrote her curriculum to include discussions on fairness. A manager who restructured his hiring process. A traveler who intervened when she saw another passenger being profiled. Each story was like a thread, weaving into something greater than any single voice. As they left the theater, Ava looked up at him. "Daddy, you were on a big screen," she said, eyes wide. Elijah laughed softly. "I know, sweetheart. It's strange, isn't it? Did it really happen?" she asked innocently. He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "All of it, the hard parts and the hopeful parts. Then I'm glad you didn't get mad that day," she said, "because if you did, maybe none of this would have happened." Her words caught him off guard. He crouched down, meeting her gaze. "You're right," he said quietly. "Sometimes. The hardest strength is staying calm when the world tells you to shout." That night, back in his apartment, Elijah stood on the balcony overlooking the glowing city. The air was warm and alive with distant laughter. He thought about the first time he'd stood before a crowd after the incident, how nervous he'd been, how raw the memory had felt. Now, the pain had softened, replaced by purpose. He poured himself a glass of water and scrolled through his messages. Among the dozens of notes and congratulations was one from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "From a young gate agent at O'Hare." He opened it. "Mr. Carter." It began, "I started working at O'Hare 6 months ago. I was trained using your story. At first, I thought it was just another company video, but then I watched you speak at the conference last year. I saw the way you forgave the people who wronged you. Yesterday, I caught myself before judging a passenger who looked anxious and out of place. I helped him instead. He turned out to be a veteran traveling for his first reunion. Thank you for teaching me to look twice." Elijah read it twice, his eyes stinging with quiet emotion. This was the revolution he believed in. Not loud, not instant, but real. Weeks later, Grace invited Elijah to attend the first graduation ceremony of Skylink's Empathy in Motion Academy. The event was small, held in a bright hangar filled with banners and the scent of jet fuel. Dozens of new employees stood proudly in their uniforms, each wearing a pin shaped like a pair of wings intertwined with a heart. When it was Elijah's turn to speak, he looked at the young faces before him and said, "You'll forget a lot of what you learn in this room. Procedures, policies, checklists, they'll blur with time. But I hope you remember this when someone walks up to your counter. They're not just a passenger. They're a story. Treat them like one worth hearing." Applause followed, soft but powerful. After the ceremony, Grace walked with him along the runway. The sun dipped low, turning the tarmac gold. "You know," she said, "when this all began, I thought we were fixing an airline, but maybe we were just fixing ourselves? Elijah smiled. Maybe that's the same thing. They stood there for a while, watching a plane lift into the horizon. As it rose, Elijah thought about the journey, the anger, the forgiveness, the rebuilding, the quiet revolution that had started not with a shout, but with a question. Why can't we do better? The plane disappeared into the clouds, and for the first time in a long while, Elijah felt completely unburdened. The skies had changed, and so had he. Autumn returned with its quiet confidence, brushing San Francisco in amber light. The year had turned full circle since the world first learned Elijah Carter's name. Yet he had changed in ways that no headline could ever capture. He was no longer the man standing at a gate demanding dignity. He had become the man building doors for others to walk through with it. It was early morning when he arrived at the Skylink Global Conference in Seattle. The air smelled faintly of rain and jet fuel, the two scents that had followed him since his life had pivoted. This time, though, he wasn't a guest speaker or consultant. He was there for something more symbolic. Grace Kim met him in the lobby, her expression warm but focused. "They're waiting for you upstairs," she said, handing him a badge with his name printed beneath a new title, Honorary Chair, the Carter Initiative. Elijah smiled. "Still feels strange seeing my name on things." Grace laughed softly. "Then you'll love the next surprise." As they entered the grand conference hall, applause rippled through the air. Hundreds of Skylink employees from around the world stood to their feet. Behind the stage, a massive banner unfurled, empathy in motion, celebrating a decade of change. Robert Hayes walked on stage, silver-haired and dignified, his energy steady despite his recent retirement. He embraced Elijah warmly before turning to the audience. "A decade ago, one man's patience forced us to face our arrogance. One man's grace turned an industry's shame into a standard. And that man," he gestured toward Elijah, "taught us that true leadership begins where ego ends." The crowd erupted in applause. Elijah stood still for a moment, letting the sound wash over him not as validation, but as closure. When it quieted, he took the microphone. "I've spent years trying to find the right words to explain what happened that day," he began. "But maybe there aren't any, because what happened wasn't just about me. It was about a mirror we all had to look into. It showed us the cracks we'd ignored, the blind spots we'd accepted, and it showed us what could happen when someone, anyone, decides to stand their ground with dignity instead of rage." He paused, scanning the faces in the crowd, pilots, attendants, agents, technicians, each representing a link in the chain of progress. When that scanner beeped green at O'Hare, it didn't just confirm a ticket, he continued. It confirmed a truth that fairness should never require proof. Every passenger, every worker, every human being deserves respect without qualification. Grace wiped away a quiet tear. Robert nodded, his eyes shining. Elijah finished with a soft smile. "We built something extraordinary, not perfect, but honest. And honesty, in a world built on appearances, is the rarest luxury of all." When the applause rose again, it wasn't thunderous. It was steady, heartfelt, human, the kind of sound that lingers long after it fades, after the ceremony. Elijah stepped outside for air. The sky above the tarmac was streaked in gold and gray, planes gliding like slow-moving constellations. Maya Thompson appeared beside him, holding a small camera. "I wasn't sure if you wanted this moment filmed," she said softly. He smiled. You've already filmed enough of my life, haven't you? Maya grinned. Just this one last frame, for the ending. Elijah looked out at the horizon. Maybe don't call it an ending. Call it the beginning of quiet work, the kind that doesn't need to trend. She nodded and lifted her camera anyway, capturing him as he watched a plane rise into the clouds. Later that evening, Elijah and Robert sat together in the hotel lounge, the hum of conversation around them fading into the background. Robert raised his glass. To the man who taught us that composure can be revolutionary. Elijah laughed. And to the man who proved corporations can have a conscience. They clinked glasses. Robert leaned back. Do you ever think about how different your life might have been if that day hadn't happened? Elijah considered it. Sometimes. But then I realize I wouldn't trade the scars for the silence. The world doesn't change when it's comfortable. Robert smiled. No, it doesn't, but maybe it can rest now. Elijah nodded. Maybe we both can. The next morning, he boarded a flight home. It was a short journey, just over 2 hours, but the familiar sounds of the boarding chime, the polite greetings, the soft hum of engines carried more meaning than ever before. The lead flight attendant, a young black woman named Naomi, greeted him warmly. Mr. Carter, she said quietly, it's an honor to have you aboard. My mother used to tell me about you when I was little. She said you reminded people that kindness could be power. Elijah smiled, touched. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She was, Naomi said. She worked at O'Hare. The words made Elijah's breath catch slightly. What was her name? Linda Hawthorne, Naomi replied, her expression bittersweet. She passed away last year, but before she did, she told me she'd met you once and that you forgave her. For a moment, the hum of the cabin seemed to quiet. Elijah felt the past and present fold into each other, the pain and the peace intertwining. He reached out, placing a gentle hand over hers. She was brave to face what she did, and you're brave for carrying her legacy forward. Naomi smiled, eyes glistening. She said the same about you. As he settled into his seat, Elijah looked out the window. The sky stretched endlessly, neither perfect nor clear but open. It struck him then that forgiveness wasn't just an act. It was an inheritance, passed from one soul to another, shaping the air we all breathed. When the plane leveled above the clouds, Elijah opened his laptop. He wasn't working on code or contracts this time. He was writing something new, an essay titled The Architecture of Grace. It began with a line he had once told a room full of executives. Systems can't feel empathy, but the people inside them can choose to act like they do. Hours passed unnoticed. The world outside dimmed into a sunset that painted the clouds in hues of rose and gold. When they landed, Ava was waiting at the gate with a handmade sign, "Welcome home, Dad." She ran to him, arms wide. He lifted her easily, laughing. "You didn't have to make a sign, sweetheart. I wanted everyone to know my dad makes airplanes kinder," she said proudly. Elijah chuckled. "Well, I don't know about airplanes, but maybe a few people inside them." As they walked out together, the airport lights shimmered like stars, somewhere nearby. A passenger was being helped patiently by a young attendant somewhere else. An argument was being diffused with understanding instead of authority. The changes were small, almost invisible, but they were there. That night, back at home, Elijah stood on the balcony, watching the faint streaks of planes crossing the dark sky. He thought about everything that had happened, the confrontation, the humiliation, the reckoning, the rebuilding, and now, the quiet revolution. The pain that had once weighed him down had transformed into something lighter meaning. Ava came to his side, still in her pajamas. "Daddy, are you thinking again?" she teased. He smiled, wrapping an arm around her. "Always." She looked up at the stars. "Do you think people ever stop being mean?" Elijah sighed softly. "Maybe not completely, but if enough of us keep trying to be kind, the world gets louder with goodness." She nodded sleepily. "Then I'll be loud too." He kissed the top of her head. "I know you will." As she drifted back to bed, Elijah stayed a while longer, the wind brushing against his face. He realized that the true measure of victory wasn't in erasing prejudice, it was in creating ripples of compassion strong enough to outlast it. In the distance, another plane lifted into the night, its lights blinking rhythmically, like a heartbeat across the horizon. Elijah whispered to the dark. His words, meant for anyone who would listen, let every flight rise with dignity. And somewhere between the earth and the sky, that promise took flight. Elijah Carter's experience reminds us that dignity and integrity are not optional. They are the foundation of meaningful action. In life, we often face moments where others' judgments challenge our sense of self-worth. What matters is how we respond with composure, clarity, and courage, even when the odds seem stacked against us. This story teaches the importance of standing firm in the face of injustice while remaining patient and measured, turning adversity into an opportunity for systemic change. It also shows the profound impact of empathy and allyship, how a single intervention, like the CEO stepping in, can transform not only one person's experience but also the culture of an entire organization. For older adults navigating workplaces, social environments, or community interactions, Elijah's journey underscores that leadership isn't just about authority or accomplishments, it's about moral courage, ethical action, and leaving a legacy that inspires others. The lessons are timeless. Recognize injustice, act thoughtfully, empower others to do the right thing, and understand that meaningful change often begins quietly, with choices that ripple outward over time. Ultimately, it's a story about resilience, human dignity, and the potential for one individual to catalyze positive change that endures beyond their own lifetime. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through Elijah Carter's story. If you felt inspired, moved, or challenged, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel to continue exploring real-life stories of courage, dignity, and transformative change. Your support helps us bring more meaningful stories to light every week.